Jean-Roch Coignet's memoirs offer a vivid account of his life as a soldier under Napoleon Bonaparte. He survived all the French campaigns. Napoleon is exiled. Let's begin. The government sent us back to our departments to plant cabbages with half pay, 73 francs per month. It was necessary to resign oneself. I sold 2 of my horses and kept my white horse, placed my servant at the House of Austria to take some horses by hand, left for Auxerre, the capital of my department, and vegetated in this town all year 1814. I knew no one. I ended up being invited to Mr. Marais, an attorney on Neuve Street, a true patriot. He offered me a place at his table. He was pursuing a lawsuit on behalf of my brother against our family, who had deprived us of a little property on our mother's side. It was Mr. Marais's father-in-law who had started the cursed lawsuit that lasted 17 years. I only learned this upon my arrival from the army. When my case was called, I appeared in court in full uniform and stood there in the deepest silence. I heard my adversaries declaiming and blaspheming against me. It was terrible to see myself vilified by Attorney Chapotin. I did not say a word. Chapotin addressed the court. "There he is," pointing at me, "this roaring lion who makes these poor people tremble by his presence. I saw him in Auxerre 2 years ago, strutting around in the evening." Fortunately, I took my revenge on my snuff-box. I stuffed snuff into my big nose, one pinch after another. But it was time for Chapotin to finish. Finally, I regained my composure and requested to speak to the president. I asked the court to postpone my case for a week to justify myself against Mr. Chapotin's slanders with my service letters. Everything was granted to me. I returned home, immediately took my service letters with supporting warrants and certificates. In a week, my case was called again. I placed all my papers on the president's desk and withdrew without saying a word. Seeing all these papers, he examined them. After reviewing them, he shared them with his judges, and he questioned Chapotin. "Mr. Chapotin, answer. Were you in such and such a town at that time?" "No, Mr. President." "Well, Captain Coignet was there. Here is the proof with his service letters. He was far from Auxerre at that time. He was defending his country, and you have insulted him. You owe him an apology. He listened to you with a calm that befits a thoughtful man." Mr. Chapotin came to shake my hands, took my arm as we left the court. He wanted to take me to dinner at his home. I thanked him. My lawsuit was interminable. It was necessary for the poor litigants to be ruined before it ended. However, 17 years should have been enough. "This case will never end," they told me. I immediately left for Paris to find Prince Cambacérès to tell him that while I was under the flags I had been stripped of a little property from my mother, and this case had lasted for 17 years. "I am no longer Minister of Justice," he said, "but I will give you a letter for my successor. Take it to him." He dictated this letter and gave it to me. "Go, my brave. Your case will be settled." Upon arrival at the Minister of Justice, I presented my letter. After reading it, he said to his secretary, "Write to Mr. Raymond, President, and Mr. Latour, King's prosecutor. Go," he said to me, "take these letters to them, and justice will be done. To which corps did you belong? To the Emperor's General Staff. Have you been to Russia?" "Yes, Mr. Minister." "Very well, go to your department." I arrived in Auxerre and went to see the King's prosecutor. I handed him my letter. I found a small man wrapped in a dressing gown, making faces like a cat caught in a trap. This old man suffered so much from gout that he could not move. He read my letter, however, but his doctor arrived and found his foot swollen. "You need leeches. How many?" "You don't know," replied the doctor, "as many as there are attorneys in Auxerre." It was said that he made all the attorneys tremble. I went to see the president. This good old man received me affably. "Here is a letter from the Minister of Justice for you." "Let's see," he said. After reading, "So you know the minister?" I know Prince Cambaceres. Your case will be settled soon. It's about time. 17 years is long. It's true, he said. I bore my misfortune patiently and awaited my fate from human justice. I settled in a modest lodging that I did not pay for. I rented a sling bed, a mattress. Fortunately, this uninhabited house had a small stable for my horse. On Sundays it was necessary to go to Mass to not be rejected from the modest half-pay. I went to see the General and then to Mr. de Goyon. On the 1st of the month, it was necessary to present oneself to the paymaster to receive one's 73 francs. 2.5% was retained in advance for our cross, and slowly they struck the big blow. They withheld 125 francs per year from our Legion of Honour, and always 2.5, so that the half-pay was reduced to 1/3. This life lasted 7 years. The general commanding the department called all the half-pay officers to ask if any officers of goodwill were willing to escort deserters to Sarre-Louis. No one volunteered. I spoke up. I will take charge of escorting them. Give me 2 officers. I will make the trip, but on the condition that I will go on horseback and that rations for my horse will be granted to me. That's enough, said the general. I left for Sarre-Louis, but on the return trip my rations were not accounted for, I complained, and it cost me my expenses. I then went to Mr. Marais to urge him to finish my case. I promise you, he said, I will strike the final blow. It will be pleaded fully soon. Be patient. They are asking for time. They are not ready. Poor litigants. One must bide one's time. The longer the case is, the more benefits accrue to the attorney's office. I bore it patiently. I frequented the Milan Café. I found groups of old regulars talking politics. They approached me to ask if I knew any news. Not at all, I said. You don't want to talk. You are afraid of compromising yourself. I swear to you that I know nothing. Well, said a big papa, they say a disguised Capuchin passed through and another great personage whom the prefect wanted to arrest. I don't understand you. You play ignorant. That's why he kept his horse, said one of them. He's waiting for the grey coat. I'm astounded hearing you talk. You might compromise yourself. I left, confused with joy, I can say, and I already believed I saw my emperor arriving. I went to press Mr. Marais to inform him of the rumours circulating. You would be happy, he said. I smiled. I can see you mounting your horse already. If he came, you would leave. With all my heart, it's true. I will arrange to have your case settled. Stay for dinner. I need some notes. The following Tuesday, my case was called and pleaded in full. The decision was postponed for 15 days. I dined again at my attorney's, who said to me, Your case is won. They will be severely beaten. But I was far from finished. I did not see the end until 1816. A storm was brewing. Joy for some, sadness for others. It was rumoured in the streets of Auxerre that the emperor had landed at Cannes, that he was marching on Grenoble, and from there to Lyon. Everyone was in consternation. But certainty broke out when a beautiful regiment of the line, the 14th, with Marshal Ney at its head, arrived early in the morning. It was said that he was going to arrest the emperor. That is not possible, I said to myself. The man I saw at Kauno taking a rifle and with 5 men stopping the enemies, this marshal whom the emperor called his lion, cannot lay hands on his sovereign. It made me shudder. I was all ears. I did not stop. Finally the marshal went to the prefect. A proclamation was made and published throughout the town. The police commissioner, well escorted, proclaimed that Bonaparte had returned and that the government's order was to arrest him. Down with Bonaparte! Long live the king! God, how I suffered! But this beautiful 14th of the line put their shakos on the end of their bayonets with cries of, Long live the emperor! What would this marshal have done without soldiers? He was forced to yield. In the evening this vanguard arrived at the town hall, but not as it had left. White cockades in the morning and tricoloured cockades in the evening. They seized the town hall, and by torchlight the same commissioner had to walk around making another proclamation and shouting at the top of his voice, Long live the emperor! I can say that I laughed heartily. In the evening this vanguard arrived at the city hall, but not as they had left, white cockades in the morning and tricoloured cockades in the evening. They seized the city hall, and by torchlight the same commissioner had to walk around making another proclamation and shouting at the top of his lungs, "Long live the Emperor!" I can say that I was bursting with joy. The next day all the people flocked to the Saint-Brie road to see the Emperor arrive in his well-escorted carriage. The snowball had grown. 700 old officers formed a battalion, and troops were arriving from all sides. Arriving at Place Saint-Étienne, the 14th Line Regiment formed a square, and the Emperor reviewed them. Then he had the officers form a circle, and upon seeing me, he called me over. "Here you are, old guard." "Yes, sire." "What rank did you hold on my staff?" "Quartermaster of the Grand Headquarters." "Well, I appoint you Quartermaster of my palace and General Quartermaster of the Grand Headquarters. Are you mounted?" "Yes, sire." "Well, follow me. Go find Monthion in Paris." This beautiful circle of officers formed around the Emperor made a crown with their swords above his head. The Emperor said to them, "Officers and soldiers, we are marching on Paris. We have nothing to fear, for there is only one soldier among the Bourbons, and that is the Duchess of Angoulême." He gave his orders and returned to the prefecture, where I followed him, and in the first room I found General Bertrand. "Here you are. Are you happy? You are staying with us." "Yes, General." "You will come to see me at the Tuileries. I will transmit the Emperor's orders to you. Has your gendarmerie fled?" "I do not know, General. The Emperor is furious. He expected to find them on his route, and not at all. I think he will send the captain to plant cabbages. And the priest, the Emperor has asked for him twice. I have just sent for him through the police officers. The cassock is going to be shaken. He can be sure of that." A moment later, I see Abbot Viard arrive, very sheepish as he passed through all this large staff. The marshal introduced him to the Emperor to receive his dressing down. The corps of officers arrived to be presented with their colonel. Upon leaving, he came up to me. "Good day, brave captain. Do you not recognize me?" "That is true, Colonel." "Well, it is you who drilled me at Courbevoie. I am one of the 50 you trained. You have grown. Your career is impressive, Colonel. Thank you. We will see each other again in Paris." "Command well," he said to his officers. "I have often spoken to you about old Coignet. Here he is, gentlemen." And he shook my hand. I took my leave and left content. The next day I left for Joigny, and the following day I embarked with 10 officers in a boat for Sens. The river was covered with boats full of troops, and we found some submerged at the bridge crossings, for we travelled at night. The banks were covered with snow. We left our boat and took carriages to reach Paris. I went to my brother's to freshen up and visited my General Monthion. I informed him that the Emperor had appointed me in Auxerre as General Quartermaster of the Grand Headquarters. "How happy I am, my brave man, to have you near me. I will take your commission. That is my responsibility." I went to the Tuileries and announced myself. "I wish to speak to General Bertrand. I will call him." General Dru told me. The general arrived. "All ready, my brave man. Did you take the post? I came as quickly as possible. I request a 6-day leave, General. Granted. Go!" I left Paris that same evening for Auxerre and arrived on Saturday morning. At that time the public strolled at the arquebuses on Sundays. Around 4 o'clock, in full uniform, I went out to show myself as if I had never left Auxerre. On Monday, I went to my lawyer, who told me, "Your case is suspended like many others. But I must leave. I only have 6 days to get to Paris. Well, it will remain suspended." I left to take my post, arriving at my brother's. The next day I went to my general. "Here you are, my brave man. Here is your commission. You are entitled to lodging with your servant and your horses. You will go to the mayor of your brother's district to be near the Tuileries. You need to get mounted. You need at least 2 horses, and as part of the sacred battalion you are entitled to 300 francs. You will collect them at Place Vendôme, number 3. Every day you will come to take my orders, and you will pass by the Tuileries at noon. I took leave of my general, went to Faubourg Saint-Honoré, and presented my commission to the mayor, who, after reading it, said, "You are the brother of the lodging housekeeper at the Agassiz market?" "Yes, sir." "You are the general quartermaster of the grand headquarters. I would like to have the list of those entitled in each rank, and the number of rations per rank. I will provide that. I will take note of it. You will do me a service to avoid abuse. You will have it in 3 days. Since when have you been in Paris?" "For 10 days on my own. I could not present myself without orders to get my lodging." "Well, you are entitled to it since your arrival in Paris. The entire sacred battalion is housed with the bourgeois. I will give you a lodging ticket dated from your arrival in Paris to get you an extra third of your pay, and for your lodging, 6 francs per day." I left with my hand full of 100 sous pieces to my brothers, where I had my lodging and my servant. The next day, I went to Place Vendôme, number 3, to collect my 300 francs of the sacred battalion's gratuity. Arriving near the captain commanding the 3rd company of officers, as simple officers were only soldiers, one had to be a senior officer to be a captain of a company of 100 officers. "I am here, captain, to claim the 300 francs owed to me." "What is your name?" "Coignet." He looked at his list and found my name. "I have no more money. You should have come with the others. But you have my money. I tell you the pay is finished. That is enough, captain. I will see about that." It was an old emigrant who had presented himself to the emperor to resume service and had been put into action. I reported to General Bertrand about the disappointment I had. "It is not possible. That old knight does not want to pay you?" "Not at all, General." "Well, I will give you a little note for him." I returned with the letter. "Captain, no need for a spit to roast this chicken. It is already plucked." His aide-de-camp standing beside him, he read the little note, and turning towards me, "Why go to the Tuileries? That is not your place." "Pardon me, captain. I am the general quartermaster and quartermaster of the palace. I am in charge of the army's lodging. I promise to lodge you in the same manner as you received me. My 300 francs, please." I was paid immediately and brought the money to my brother. I went to get my coupons for my forage rations from the supplier who reimbursed me. I was entitled to 3 rations per day. Adding this to my monthly 300 francs, I soon saw myself with 800 francs. Then I had to get mounted, and I started searching for horses. I found 2 near the carousel at a royalists who had fled. I bought them for 2,700 francs. They were very beautiful. My brother lent me 2,500 francs. I then went to my brother's notary. He drew up a contract by which I acknowledged owing my brother the sum of 2,500 francs, and while the deed was being drafted, I made my will which I deposited with the notary. My brother scolded me upon seeing the contract. "Well, I told him, if I die in this campaign, you will find my will with your notary." I looked for a good servant and had my 2 horses harnessed. Everything finished, I went to visit my general on horseback, servant behind, like a place commander making his rounds. I entered Count Monthion's hotel. "General, here I am mounted." "All ready," he said. "That is your business, and 2 beautiful horses. My battle horse cost me 1,800 francs, and my servant's horse 900 francs. You are better mounted than I am. I am pleased, my brave man. You can go into the campaign. Are they paid for? It is my brother who lent me the money." Often the good general would take me from my brothers to go for a ride, on horseback or by carriage, and invited me to dine with his family. He remembered the good fires I made for him during the retreat from Moscow. Having made all my preparations to go into the campaign, I set about organizing the march order of the equipment by rank to avoid confusion during marches, as well as for distributions. This precaution served me well, and I was later commended for it. The preparations for the Champ de Mai were being made at the Champ de Mars, in front of the École Militaires façade. The Emperor, in full costume, surrounded by his staff, came to receive the deputies and the peers of France. Once the reception was over, the emperor descended from his majestic amphitheatre to reach another in the middle of the Champ de Mai. We had all the trouble in the world crossing the crowd so tightly packed that it had to be pushed back to pass. And there, with the staff lined up, the emperor gave a speech. He had the eagles brought to distribute them to the army and the National Guard. With his stentorian voice, he cried out to them, "Swear to defend your eagles! Do you swear?" He repeated. But the oaths lacked energy. The enthusiasm was weak. These were not the shouts of Austerlitz and Wagram, the emperor noticed. It was impossible to see more people. We could barely maneuver, and he could hardly review the troops. We had to protect the emperor's entourage in the midst of these masses. The Champ de Mai took place on June the 1st. Returning from this grand ceremony, I made my preparations to leave for the army. I left Paris on June 4th to go to Soissons, and from there to Avesnes, where I was to await new orders. The emperor arrived on the 13th, and stayed only briefly. He went to sleep at Lyon. On June 14th, he ordered forced marches. Marshal Ney arrived. The emperor said to him in front of everyone, "Marshal, your protégé Bourmont has defected to the enemy with his officers." The Prince of the Moskowa was moved. He gave him command of an army corps of 40,000 men to advance against the English. "You can push the English towards Brussels," he told him. When we entered this fertile country of Belgium amidst very tall rye, the columns had difficulty making their way. The front ranks could not advance. Once trampled underfoot, it was only straw, where the cavalry got lost. This was one of our misfortunes. To set foot in the plain of Fleurus, the emperor moved forward, following the main road with his staff and a squadron of horse grenadiers. He was conversing with an aide-de-camp. He looked to his left, took his small telescope, and looked intently at a steep height far from the road, in an immense plain. He saw dismounted cavalry and said, "That is not my cavalry. We must make sure. Bring an officer from my escort, and have him go recognize that troop." I was signalled to approach the emperor. "It is you." "Yes, sire." "Go at a gallop to reconnoitre the troop on that mountain. You can see it from here." "Yes, sire. Do not get caught." I set off at a gallop. Arriving at the foot of this steep mountain, I noticed 3 officers mounting their horses, and thought I saw lances, but I was not sure. I continued to climb slowly, and I saw that their soldiers were circling the mountain to cut off my retreat. Halfway up the mountain, I saw my 3 fellows descending in a spiral. They crossed paths and could only descend at a slow pace. I stopped short. I saw they were enemies. Then, very politely, I saluted them and descended. They all 3 descended. I was not worried about them, but it was the others who were taking the path to cut me off. I looked to my left, and nothing appeared. Reaching the bottom of the mountain, these gentlemen were still descending. Once in the plain, I turned towards them and gave a grand salute, seeing my path clear. I told my fine battle horse, "Gently, Coco." That was the name of this beautiful animal. I had a head start when one of them took it upon himself to pursue me. The other 2 waited. He was gaining ground, and that encouraged him. When I saw him halfway between the mountain and the emperor's staff, who were watching my movements and seeing me closely pursued, sent 2 horse grenadiers to my rescue, I coaxed my horse so he would not bolt. I looked back, and I saw I had enough time to turn left and charge at him in turn. He shouted at me, "I have got you, and I have got you too." Turning left, I charged at him. Seeing me make this sudden half-turn, he faltered. But it was too late. The die was cast. He had to face it. He was not yet in full retreat when I was at his side, thrusting a point at him. He fell dead, head down. Dropping my sword hanging from my wrist, I seized his horse and proudly returned to the emperor. "Well, old guard, I thought you were caught. Who taught you to make such a maneuver, one of your elite gendarmes during the Russian campaign? You did well. You are well mounted. Did you see that officer? He seemed blond to me. It is always a coward. He should have engaged in combat and got himself killed like a child. Such a sabre blow is not meritorious. You are grumbling, I think. Yes, sire, I should have taken the horse by the bridle and brought it back to you. He gave a slight smile, and the horse arrived. It is from such and such an English regiment. Everyone patted my horse, and an officer asked me to sell it to him. Give 15 Napoleons to my servant, 20 francs to the grenadiers, and take it. The Emperor said to the Grand Marshal, "Note the old guard. After the campaign I will see about him." It was, I believe, on the 14th, on the other side of Gilly, that we encountered a strong Prussian vanguard. The cuirassiers galloped through this town so fast that the horseshoes flew over the houses. The Emperor watched them pass to exit. It was a steep climb, and one cannot imagine the speed of this cavalry in crossing the mountain. The town was paved. Our intrepid cuirassiers reached the Prussians and sabred them without taking prisoners. They were driven back to their front line with considerable loss. The campaign had begun. Our troops bivouacked at the entrance of the plain of Charleroi, which is called Fleurus. The enemy could not see us and did not believe in a united army. Our Emperor did not think they were united either, and on the night of the 15th, he was personally at the head of his army. In the morning, he sent out reconnaissance in all directions to determine the enemy's position. Only the Grand Marshal, Count Monthion, and I remained near him. He went to a village on the left of the plain, at the foot of a windmill, and the Prussian armies were largely on his right, but masked by enclosures, clusters of trees, and farms. "Their position is covered. We cannot see them," said all the officers who arrived. The order was given to attack along the entire line. The Emperor climbed into the windmill, and through a hole he could see all the movements. The Grand Marshal said to him, "Here is General Gérard's corps passing. Bring Gérard up." He arrived near the Emperor. "Gérard," he said, "your Bourmont, whom you vouched for, has defected to the enemy," and showing him a steeple to the right through the windmill's hole. "You need to head to that steeple and push the Prussians relentlessly. I will support you. Grouchy has my orders." All the staff officers left and did not return. Then the Emperor sent me to General Gérard. "Head to the steeple, find Gérard, and wait for his orders to return." I left at a gallop. It was not a small mission. Detours were necessary. There were only enclosures. I did not know which path to take. Finally, I found this intrepid general who was engaged, covered in mud. I approached him. "The Emperor sends me to you, General." "Go tell the Emperor that if he sends me reinforcements, the Prussians will be crushed. Tell him I have lost half my soldiers, but if I am supported, victory is assured." It was not a battle. It was a slaughter. The charge was striking on all sides. There was only one cry: "Forward!" I reported to the Emperor. After hearing me, he said, "Ah, if I had 4 lieutenants like Gérard, the Prussians would be lost." I returned much earlier than those whom the Emperor had sent before me. In the evening, after the battle was won, 6 of them did not appear. The Emperor rubbed his hands after my report. He had me describe all the places I had passed through. "They are just orchards, big trees, and farms. That is it," he said. "We thought it was woods. No, sire, they are covered paths. All our columns were advancing. Victory was decided. The Emperor said to us, 'To horse at the gallop. There are my columns climbing the knoll.'" Off we went. Across the plain, there was a ditch 3 to 4 paces wide. The Emperor's horse hesitated for a moment. My horse leaped over, and I found myself ahead of His Majesty, carried by its speed. I feared being scolded for my temerity, but not at all. Arriving on the knoll, the Emperor looked at me and said, "If your horse were a stallion, I would take him." Yeah. Cannonballs were still falling at the foot of the knoll, but our columns drove the Prussians into the hollows on the right. This lasted until nightfall. The victory was complete. The Emperor withdrew very late from the battlefield and returned to the village near the windmill. There he sent officers to all points. 2 officers left to order Marshal Grouchy to pursue the Prussians relentlessly and not give them time to regroup. It was Count Monthion who dictated the dispatches by order of the Major General, and the duty officers left immediately. That night we were all on duty. No one rested. Once the dispatches were sent, 2 officers were sent to Marshal Ney, and the entire night was filled with movement. I was fortunate to spend a quiet night, although 6 officers were missing and said to have defected to the enemy. This concludes the 14th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please consider subscribing for more episodes.